The late afternoon sun filtered through the wide windows of the sugar jar, casting golden shadows across the flour-dusted counter and curling at the corners of handwritten recipe cards taped along the wall. The air smelled of warm brown sugar and melted butter, the kind of scent that reached inside a person and pulled them gently back into a memory of simpler times. Leela Dawson stood at her baking station, kneading cinnamon brioche dough with the kind of focus that came from a lifetime of making something from nothing. Her arms ached pleasantly, the muscles used to the rhythm of work, but her mind wandered. The dough was smooth beneath her fingers, familiar and forgiving and like her ledger book, which sat closed beside a flickering candle and reminded her with silent urgency that time and money were running out. She pushed her shoulder-length curls back with the crook of her wrist and reached for the jar of clove sugar. The Bluetooth speaker in the corner played a scratchy old country song, one her mother used to hum while canning peach preserves in their kitchen trailer. The melody wrapped around her like a hand-sewn quilt thread, bare in places, but comforting all the same. Lila had built the sugar jar from the ashes of her own heartbreak. She'd taken a second-hand espresso machine, her grandmother's rolling pin, and a dream most people thought foolish, and turned it into something real. It was small, worn, a little crooked in the corners, but it was hers, and that meant everything. Still, there were nights she cried behind the bakery case when no one was around. Mornings when she sold one scone and lived off peanut butter sandwiches to keep the lights on. Love didn't pay rent. Passion didn't fix a broken oven coil. But somehow, through sheer stubbornness and the kindness of loyal regulars, she was still here. She glanced at the unpaid utility bills clipped to the fridge door with a magnet shaped like a lemon tart. Rent was due in 5 days. Flour prices were rising. Her delivery van hadn't started that morning. And yet, she rolled her dough with care, refusing to let fear flavor the sweetness she made for others. As the clock ticked toward closing, the shop was quiet. The last customer had left a thank you note with a tip folded inside. Leela leaned against the counter, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. She took a moment to close her eyes and breathe. Just breathe before facing what felt like an unyielding future. Then her phone buzzed. She wiped her hands on her apron and grabbed it from the stool. Jenna Dawson flashed across the screen. Her heart lifted and then immediately dropped. Jenna never called during the day. They usually texted jokes and shared silly memes in the evenings. A call meant something had happened. Something real. She answered with forced cheer. "Hey, stranger, what's up? You finally miss my face." But the voice on the other end wasn't playful. It was a whisper soaked in tears. "Lila, I need you." Lila's smile vanished. She sat down slowly on the stool, heart racing. "Jen, what's wrong? Talk to me." There was a pause, then a ragged breath. "I'm being forced to marry Colton Hayes this weekend. I don't know what to do." The name hit like ice water. Lila had never met Colton Hayes, but she knew of him. Everyone in Savannah did. He was the kind of man people described with both awe and disdain. Self-made real estate mogul who built half the city's waterfront properties before the age of 30. Rumors of his ruthlessness outpaced his philanthropy, and though his face graced the cover of every local business magazine, no one could claim they really knew him. Lila sat in stunned silence. "What do you mean forced?" Jenna's voice cracked. "My dad, he made some horrible investment choices. Lost everything. The only reason we didn't go under was because Hayes Enterprises paid off our debt. In exchange, they want me to marry him, seal the partnership. It's all about appearances, legitimacy, some twisted Southern aristocracy deal. But, you love Dylan." "I do." The sobs came now, full and real. "He's the only person who's ever seen me. Not my family's expectations. Not my bank account. Just me." Lila's throat tightened. She thought of Dylan, the mural artist, who wore second-hand boots and painted sunflowers in alleys. The boy who once carved Jenna's initials into a driftwood bench on Tybee Island and swore he'd build a life around her laughter. Lila had never believed in fairy tales, but if anyone came close, it was those two. "I want to leave with him," Jenna whispered, "but I can't do it alone." Leela already knew what she was about to ask. "I need you to crash the wedding." There was silence between them, dense and heavy. "Leela," Jenna breathed, "say something." Lila stood and walked to the window. The bakery lights cast a soft glow against the dusky street outside. She watched the breeze rustle the flags on the lampposts, the sky turning from amber to steel. Her whole life had been about doing the quiet, right thing, surviving, baking sweetness into a bitter world. But this wasn't quiet. This was war. She turned back toward the counter and saw the framed photo of her and Jenna, taken the year they painted the bakery sign by hand. Jenna had paint in her hair and frosting on her nose. They were laughing like fools, like girls who believed in second chances. "I'll do it," Lila said quietly. Jenna choked back a sob. "You will, yes, you'll crash the wedding. Fake a scandal, be the distraction, whatever you need." There was a long silence. Then Jenna whispered, "Thank you. I love you. You're saving me." When the call ended, Lila's body trembled not from fear, but from the weight of loyalty. She didn't know what she was going to say when she stormed into that cathedral. She didn't know if her plan would work, or if she'd make a fool of herself in front of half of Savannah's elite. But she knew this. Jenna deserved a life of her own choosing. And if Lila had to set fire to her own reputation to make that happen, she would do it with a smile and a match. She walked to the back room and dug through a storage box until she found the old red wig she'd worn to a costume party years ago. She slipped it on, staring at her reflection. The woman who stared back looked nothing like the girl behind the counter. She looked like trouble. Good, they'd never see her coming. Back in the kitchen, she pulled a tray of lemon shortbread from the oven and let the scent settle her nerves. Then she opened her notebook and scribbled a plan, half joke, half war strategy. Jenna had already texted a list of Colton's preferences, old scandals, and soft spots. Lila would use them all. She might not have money or power, but she had timing and she had heart. The storm was coming, and it would be sweet. Savannah woke up in sunlight the morning of the wedding. It poured through shutters, kissed the moss-draped oaks, and made the river shimmer like glass. The city, still sticky with spring, moved with a kind of unspoken reverence, as if it too were preparing to witness something grand. Lila Dawson stood in her apartment staring at herself in the mirror, turning slowly from side to side, as if the woman reflected back was a stranger. Her green thrift store dress hugged just enough to draw the eye, and beneath it, a balloon swelled her belly into something suggestive and scandalous. She had stuffed it, carefully secured with masking tape, and her best poker face, a red wig, sat atop her head, bright and defiant, a tangled mess of curls that screamed drama from across the room. She looked ridiculous, and exactly right. The effect wasn't beauty, it was disruption. She had never crashed a wedding before, and certainly not one where the groom had enough money to buy half the city. But this wasn't about pride. It was about Jenna, about breaking cages dressed up as tradition. At her kitchen table lay a carefully forged invitation, designed the night before, using canva, desperation, and too much coffee. She slipped it into her bag along with lip balm, tissues, and the courage she hoped wouldn't desert her at the altar. Outside, the sky was so blue it almost mocked her. She walked the 5 blocks to the cathedral, heels clicking against cobblestone. Every step echoed louder in her ears, like a countdown she couldn't pause. She passed tourists snapping photos, children licking popsicles, a saxophone player on the corner offering lazy notes of Georgia on My Mind. Life, as always, was unaware of the storm about to unfold. The cathedral rose like a dream from another century. Marble steps and towering columns adorned with fresh white roses and silk ribbons. It was the kind of place designed to make people feel small and weddings feel sacred. Lila climbed the steps with her head held high, slipping the invitation to the usher without a word. He glanced at her long red wig, floral perfume, and Holland narrowed his eyes, but he waved her in. She exhaled slowly as she entered. The inside was a wash of light and hush. Stained glass cast rainbows on the aisle. Strings played something elegant and expensive. Rows upon rows of guests whispered and adjusted their bow ties. Savannah's elite had come out in full. Developers, politicians, socialites with pearls clutched tight. And there, near the altar, was Colton Hayes. He stood tall in a tailored charcoal suit, his broad shoulders perfectly square, his jaw carved from the kind of lineage money couldn't buy but liked to pretend it could. His black hair was swept back, every strand in its place. He had the look of a man who didn't flinch at fire, who had never been denied a thing in his life. Lila had seen photos of him before, but they hadn't prepared her for the weight of his presence. There was something about him, something sharp and distant, like a skyscraper in a field of flowers. She took a seat in the last pew, near the exit, just in case. Her fake belly pressed tightly against her dress, and she shifted to keep it from wrinkling or slipping. She wiped her palms on her thighs. Her heart was hammering. Then Jenna appeared. Leela's breath caught. Jenna floated down the aisle, cloaked in lace and sorrow. Her gown shimmered. Her veil trailed behind her like mist, but her eyes, those bright, bold eyes, were dim. She looked beautiful and broken. It was time. Leela's knees wobbled as she stood. She cleared her throat, but the words lodged in her chest. Then she thought of Jenna, of Dylan waiting on a motorcycle outside, with his heart in his hands, and she stepped into the aisle. Stop the wedding. It wasn't loud at first, but it was enough. The cathedral rippled like water touched by stone. Gasps, whispers, a collective inhale. Colton turned. So did everyone else. Lila walked slowly, every step echoing through the marble vault of the church. Her hand clutched her stomach, her eyes wide with false emotion. "You can't marry him," she said, voice shaking just enough to seem real. "He already promised himself to me." Colton's brow furrowed. "What the hell is this? You don't remember me, do you?" she said, a tragic smile curving her lips. "I guess the rusty Anchor Bar was forgettable for you. One night, one car ride, one mistake." She reached for her belly. "Except it wasn't one night for me." The room exploded into murmurs. Colton stepped off the altar, face tightening. "Who are you?" "Your unfinished business," she replied, her voice rising. "You said I was special, that you'd call, that you wanted more." She sniffled for dramatic effect. "But I guess once you got what you wanted, I disappeared. Like all the others, right? Now you get to stand here like nothing happened, like you don't have a child on the way." He stared at her, cold and confused. "I don't know you." "You're lying." "Am I?" She turned to the crowd. He drove a vintage Mustang that night. Black, leather seats, smelled like cigars and arrogance. The detail made someone gasp. "That's his car," an old woman whispered behind her. "The one he parks in front of the office." Colton stepped closer. "You're insane, and you're a liar," Lila said, forcing a tear down her cheek. "I don't care what you do to me, but you won't take away her choice." She didn't look at Jenna, but she didn't have to. She felt her cousin move, the soft rustle of silk as she slid toward the side door, the hush of the crowd as they turned to follow the real story happening behind them. Jenna running down the aisle toward her freedom. And Dylan, bless him, was there, helmet in hand, bike engine purring. The cathedral had no time to react. Colton swore under his breath, realizing too late what this really was. He stepped toward Leela, hand raised not to strike, but to seize control. "You think you can walk in here and ruin me?" She leaned forward. "I didn't come here to ruin you. I came here to save her." Then she did something ridiculous, bold, final. She kissed her fingers and pressed them to her fake belly. "Wish us luck, Daddy." Then she ran. The wig bounced. Behind her, the balloon threatened to slip, but she didn't stop. Laughter chased her down the hall. Shock followed close behind. She threw open the doors and let the sunlight swallow her whole. Outside, the sky was still heartbreakingly blue. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The damage was done, and the storm had only just begun. The moment the sun dipped behind the trees, the streets of Savannah turned to shadows. The gas lamps lining the sidewalks flickered with soft golden light, catching in rain puddles left from an earlier storm. The sugar jar was quiet now, its display cases wiped clean and lights dimmed, the scent of vanilla and yeast still lingering. In the air like a whispered goodbye. Lila Dawson had just finished closing the metal shutter when she felt the shift in the air. It wasn't sound, not at first. It was a presence, like the hairs on her neck had caught a signal her eyes hadn't seen yet. She turned, instinct sharp. A sleek black SUV rolled to a slow stop at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the glow of the street lamps. The engine idled, low and purring. Then the driver's door opened, and 3 men stepped out. They wore black suits and moved in unison, quiet, focused, like men used to orders and power. "Leela Dawson?" one of them asked, his voice low and toneless. She blinked, heart thudding. "Who wants to know?" The man didn't answer. Another stepped forward. The world tilted just for a second, and then a strong hand clamped over her mouth. Her scream dissolved into silence. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the empty sidewalk where no one stood to help. When she woke, the world smelled like bleach. The ceiling above her was white and unfamiliar, the edges of her vision blurry. Her body ached. Her wrists stung. When she tried to move, the leather restraints around her limbs pulled tight, keeping her body locked to a padded table. Panic flared through her, wild and cold. "Hello," she shouted, voice hoarse. "Where am I?" The door opened, and she wished she hadn't asked. Colton Hayes stepped into the room. He wore another impeccable suit, dark gray this time, like the storm clouds gathering in her stomach. His face was unreadable, the line of his jaw hard as stone. He walked toward her slowly, his shoes clicking against the tile like a metronome. "You," Lila hissed. "You psychopath. Let me go." Colton's eyes never left hers. "You humiliated me. You lied. You cost me millions. You put my name on every gossip site between here and Charleston. I don't care if I cost you 100 empires." She spat. "You were going to force Jenna into a life she didn't choose. I would do it again, would you?" His voice dropped, dangerously calm. "Would you do it again if it meant giving up your own freedom?" "I have nothing you want," she snapped. A cruel half-smile touched his lips. "You shouldn't have pretended to be pregnant, Leela. I was acting. That's the point of a scene. I intend to make it real." She blinked, confusion curdling into fear. "What are you talking about?" Colton turned slightly as another man entered, a nervous-looking doctor in a white coat, eyes shifting like he didn't want to be there. "Don't," Leela said, voice shaking now. "Whatever this is, don't." Colton's voice turned colder. "You created a story. You used my name. You made me the villain. So now, I will write the ending." The doctor stepped forward with a syringe. "No," Lila screamed, thrashing against the restraints. "Don't you dare." But the needle pierced her skin. A sting, then fire, then a rush of heat, a noise, and nothingness. When she opened her eyes again, the white room was gone. This one had curtains, a rug, a small window bolted shut with steel bars embedded into the frame, a wooden dresser, a table with food, a locked door. The walls were beige, the air sterile. No clocks, no sense of time. She was somewhere new. She sat up slowly, her muscles aching. On the table beside her sat a stack of papers, an agreement, printed on thick ivory stock. The first line read, "By carrying this child to term, the undersigned agrees to relinquish all parental rights in exchange for legal protection from criminal charges." Lila shoved it away, bile rising in her throat. Her chest tightened as if her ribs had forgotten how to move. He wanted to silence her, to own her. But he had made a mistake, because Leela Dawson did not surrender. Tears blurred her vision, but she wiped them away with shaking hands. Not because she was weak, because she was furious. She scanned the room with purpose. The guards rotated at predictable intervals. She could hear them. The meals came on a metal tray. The utensils were plastic, useless. But the delivery boy had once left a napkin folded beneath her sandwich, and inside it, a spoon, a flimsy plastic spoon. She hid it beneath her mattress. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Colton visited her often, always in control, always wearing the same unreadable face. He asked questions about her health, watched her eat, never touched her, but he stared, as if trying to understand how something so small could unravel his world. One evening, she sat on the sofa, arms crossed tightly over her stomach, still flat, still silent. Colton leaned against the doorframe. "You could have just apologized, you know," Lila scoffed. "You could have not kidnapped me." His mouth twitched just a little. "Do you want something?" she asked, annoyed. "I wanted control," he said after a pause. "You shattered that." She turned toward him. "You think this is control? You think locking someone away and violating their body is strength?" "I think this is necessity," he said, but there was something in his voice, a crack, a hesitation. "I don't care what kind of empire you think you're protecting," she said quietly. "You'll never be more than a coward in a suit if you keep choosing fear over truth." He didn't respond, but he didn't storm out either. That night, Leela used the spoon to dig at the window latch. Bit by bit, screw by screw. Her hands blistered, but she kept going. She began writing notes in the margins of her old recipes, tiny pencil marks, describing guard schedules, weak floorboards, hinge positions. She had her mother's pecan pie recipe memorized, but now it held instructions on how to get free. One afternoon, her body felt strange, heavier, off balance. She reached for the table and nearly fell. The nausea came next, rising like a wave. She staggered into the bathroom and retched until her knees gave out. When the nurse came, she said nothing, just handed her a plastic stick. The 2 lines turned pink, Pregnant. Lila sank to the floor. It wasn't a joke anymore. It wasn't a balloon. It wasn't a stunt. She pressed her palms to her belly and whispered, "I didn't want this. Not like this." The nurse said nothing, just left the room quietly. Later, Colton arrived. He brought a new contract. His voice was subdued. "Now it's real. You can sign this and walk away when it's over." Lila stared at the pages. Her heart pounded in her ears. Then slowly, she picked up the document and tore it in half. Then again and again, until the pieces fell like snow to the floor. "This child," she said, voice hard, "is not yours to claim, and neither am I." Colton stood frozen. Something flickered across his face. Anger, yes, but something else too. Shame, uncertainty. He didn't speak, just turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Lila sank back onto the bed, eyes burning, but her spirit unshaken. She wasn't free yet, but she would be. She walked to the window that night, spoon in hand, and picked up where she'd left off. She had one mission now, not just to escape, but to protect what was growing inside her. Because whatever the world believed about Colton Hayes, whatever kind of man he had once been, this child would never be raised in fear. Not while she had breath left in her body, and not while the lock on that window was still waiting to break. Rain rolled against the glass like quiet music, slow and steady, as if Savannah itself had grown tired of holding its breath. The skies outside the lakeside house had darkened before noon, and now they poured freely, silver streams sliding down the bolted windows in Lila Dawson's room. Inside, she sat curled on the floor beneath the sill, one arm resting on her knee, the other slowly working the edge of the spoon against the window frame's corroded seam. She'd made progress barely visible, but enough to let her believe in movement. Her fingers were raw, a blister just beginning to split on her palm, but she welcomed the sting. Pain meant purpose. Her body felt heavier these days. There was a quiet ache in her hips, a subtle shift in her center of gravity. Her chest had grown tender. She'd caught her reflection earlier and barely recognized the woman staring back defiant. Stubborn, pregnant. The baby wasn't a symbol anymore. It wasn't a consequence. It was real. A heartbeat, a warmth she carried. And though its beginning had been tangled in coercion, what grew now inside her was hers. She'd speak to it sometimes, in the quiet, not in words of comfort, but of rebellion. "You're not his, you're mine. And I'm getting us out of here." The door creaked open behind her. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. She'd grown attuned to Colton Hayes' presence. He moved like a man who never had to ask permission. His steps measured and assured. "You're still digging," he said, voice quiet. "I saw the marks." She kept her back to him. He built a cage and expected silence. "I'm not your prisoner, just your mistake." There was a long pause. Then, "I don't think you're a mistake." She turned then, slowly, rising to her feet. "No." "Then, what am I?" He stood near the door, one hand tucked into the pocket of his pressed slacks, the other holding something wrapped in a linen napkin. He looked tired, the sharp angles of his face less polished, his hair slightly damp from the rain. "You're the first person in a long time who's told me no," he said. "And not just because you hate me, but because you mean it. Are you expecting gratitude for that?" He unwrapped the napkin and set a small slice of chocolate tart on the table. "I remembered what you said in the beginning, that you baked to survive the hard days. This one's from a bakery I used to pass on my way to school. I thought you might like it." She stared at the tart, untouched. "I'm not interested in your olive branches. I figured." He pulled out the chair across from hers and sat. "I just didn't want to eat alone." The rain was louder now. Thunder grumbled across the lake, distant but steady. "You can't keep me here forever," she said after a while. "I know." "Then why are you still doing this?" He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Because I don't know what else to do, and because letting you go would mean admitting I lost." "You already lost, Colton," she said softly. "The moment you let your power matter more than your soul." His eyes flicked to hers. "Do you think I have a soul, Lila?" It was the first time he'd said her name aloud. She looked at him long and hard. "I don't know, but I think you used to." There was something in his face, then a shift, like a fracture cracking deeper. He looked away. "The thing you did back there," he murmured, "at the church, it wasn't just about Jenna, was it?" Lila didn't answer. "I saw the way you looked at me, like I was everything you hated about men like me." "You were," she said plainly. "You still are most days." He gave a dry laugh. most days. She didn't want to say what had begun creeping in beneath the fury. How complicated it felt now, seeing him sit across from her like this and guarded, asking questions he might not want the answers to. "You ever think," she said, "that maybe you're not the villain, just the result of one?" Colton leaned back, his arms folding slowly. "My father built Hayes Enterprises. He raised me like a soldier. No mistakes, no softness, just deals, expectations, legacy. He arranged my engagement to Jenna like a real estate transaction. She had pedigree, we had power, match made in hell." Lila watched him speak, unsure what to do with the vulnerability in his voice. "You didn't have to go along with it," she said. "I was going to back out. I was going to walk away." He shook his head. "But then you came in. And instead of leaving on my terms, I got blindsided, mocked, humiliated. Everything I thought I was holding together came crashing down." "That wasn't me," she said. "That was the truth." Another rumble of thunder passed. The window shuddered gently in its frame. Colton looked down at his hands. "I used to dream about opening a vineyard. Nothing fancy. Just rows of earth. And quiet. I don't even like real estate. I just inherited it like a curse." "And this house?" she asked, gesturing around. "Is this part of the inheritance too?" "No. I bought this one years ago. For my mother, before she left." "She left?" He nodded. "She told my father she was done living like a shadow. She vanished one night, never came back. No note, no goodbye." Lila swallowed. "Is that what you're afraid of? Being left?" His eyes flicked up again, and something unspoken passed between them, too soft for anger, too sharp for comfort. He stood suddenly, the chair scraping lightly. "You're tired. I'll leave you alone." She watched him move to the door. Something in her chest felt heavy, twisted. "Colton," he turned, hand resting on the doorframe. "What do you want from me?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want you to stop looking at me like I'm past saving." That night, she couldn't sleep. The rain hadn't let up. The room was filled with shadows and echoes. She sat on the floor with a blanket draped around her shoulders, the spoon clutched in one hand. She thought of his face when he spoke of his mother, the crack in his voice when he said vineyard, the way he hadn't flinched when she tore up the contract. She didn't forgive him, not even close. But something had shifted in her. Not surrender. Recognition. He was human, and he didn't know what to do with the damage he'd caused. She pressed her hand to her belly, whispering to the quiet, "You'll never grow up thinking fear is love. I promise you that." Then, as the rain continued to fall, she returned to the window. Her fingers curled around the spoon. The lock groaned slightly. She smiled. Every story had its turn, and hers was just beginning to shift. The morning light filtered through the bars on the window, softer than usual, almost hesitant. The rain had passed, leaving dew on the sill and a thin coat of fog on the lake beyond. The world felt clean, reborn, as if something had been washed away in the night. But inside the house, nothing felt fresh or new. Lila Dawson sat on the edge of her narrow bed, one hand pressed over her stomach, her other hand limp at her side. The plastic pregnancy test lay on the table. Its twin pink lines stared up at her like a whisper she couldn't unhear. She hadn't cried, not yet. There was a tightness behind her eyes, but no release, only weight, only silence. The nurse had said the words flatly, clinically, "You're pregnant." Then she'd left, closing the door gently, as if trying not to disturb something. Fragile. Lila didn't feel fragile. She felt fury simmering low in her bones. Not because of the child, but because of the way it had begun. Because of the control Colton had taken, the choice he had tried to steal. But as she sat there, she felt something else, too. Not weakness, not surrender, but something warm and unrelenting blooming beneath the anger. This child was real, and it was hers. When Colton arrived, he didn't knock. He never did. He entered like he always had, silent, composed, guarded. But when he saw her sitting so still, her back straight, her eyes unreadable, he hesitated. "No," he said softly. Lila turned her head, just enough to meet his gaze. "The test doesn't lie." He nodded, slowly. "The doctor confirmed it this morning. You're 8 weeks along." She looked away. "You must be thrilled." Colton walked to the table and set something down, another envelope. "I had this drawn up," he said. "An amended contract. Now that it's official." She didn't move. "I'm not asking you to sign it right now," he added, "just to consider it. You carry the child to term. You sign over custody. In return, I drop everything. You get your life back. No charges, no threats. I walk away, and so do you." Lila stood, slow and deliberate. She walked to the table, picked up the envelope, opened it. The pages were neatly typed, full of clauses and conditions. She skimmed them, heart thudding. Then, wordlessly, she tore the contract in half, then in half again, and again, until the pieces fluttered to the ground like falling snow. Colton watched her, unmoving. When she looked up, her voice was calm. "I don't care what your lawyers say. This baby isn't a deal. It isn't a weapon. And it isn't yours to claim." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "You wanted to make something real out of a lie. Congratulations, it worked. But now that it's real, it belongs to me." He opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. "I don't forgive you, Colton. Not for what you did. Not for the way you tried to own me. But I'm not giving this child to you. Not for peace. Not for money. Not for anything." The silence between them was thick, charged with things neither of them had the words to name. Then, slowly, Colton stepped back. He looked at the torn papers, on the floor, then at her. "I never wanted it to be like this," he said quietly. Lila laughed, just once, bitter and sharp. "And yet, here we are." He didn't argue. He just turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. She collapsed into the chair, her hands trembling now. The anger had steadied her for a while, but now the emotions were too heavy to hold alone. She curled her arms around herself and finally let the tears come. Later that night, the nurse returned. She brought warm broth and a few crackers. Lila barely touched them, but she asked for one thing, a notebook. She needed to write, not escape, not plan. Just remember. She wrote down everything she felt, the fear, the fury, the flicker of hope, and when the next morning came, she asked to see a doctor. Colton didn't appear that day, but his driver did. They took her to a private clinic outside the city, one she didn't recognize, with whitewashed walls and ocean paintings that tried too hard to calm. She sat in the examination room in a paper gown. Heart, THUDDING. When the doctor entered, she was kind-eyed and gentle-handed. "Would you like to hear the heartbeat?" Lila swallowed, nodded. The gel was cold. The probe pressed gently against her skin, and then a sound filled the room, a steady thump. Fast, alive. Lila's lips parted. She hadn't known she was holding her breath until that moment. "That's your baby," the doctor said, her voice a hush. "That's life." She didn't speak. She couldn't, but her eyes filled, and for the first time, the tightness in her chest cracked open. Colton had come in at some point. She hadn't noticed, but now he stood in the corner, arms crossed, face pale. He didn't speak either, just listened. When it was over, she wiped her belly clean, sat up, and looked at him. "It's real," she said. He nodded. "It is not just a consequence anymore," she added. "No," he said, "not anymore." Their eyes met. For once, neither of them tried to win. On the ride back, the car was silent, but different than before, less like a prison, more like a pause. Back at the house, she returned to her room without a word. That night, she opened her window slightly, just enough to let the air in. It smelled like rain and lake water. She pressed her hand to her stomach. "I don't know what kind of world I'm bringing you into," she whispered, "but I swear it won't be this." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, she felt something anchor her, something beyond fear. The heartbeat echoed in her memory, rhythmic, strong, alive, and Lila Dawson, who had fought her whole life just to stay standing, suddenly found something worth falling for. Not Colton, not yet, but the life growing inside her, the one thing they hadn't taken, the one thing she would protect with everything she had left. The first breath of morning that met Lila Dawson outside the estate felt like something sacred, moist, tinged with pine, and utterly free. She had waited weeks for this, not escape, not a victory, but a return. She stood beside the black town car Colton had sent, not out of coercion this time, but after a quiet conversation neither of them had expected. He had asked, not ordered. She had said yes, not because she owed him anything, but because she owed it to herself to go home, back to the sugar jar. The lake house faded behind her as the road curved back toward the familiar streets of Savannah. For once, the silence in the car was not the kind laced with danger or dread. It was peace, or something reaching for it. When they arrived, The air outside the bakery was thick with humidity and the faint scent of cinnamon from the shop next door. Lila stepped out, her hand instinctively cradling the swell of her stomach, now beginning to show beneath her loose blouse. She wasn't hiding anymore. Not from herself, not from the city, not from the truth of what had happened. The sugar jar looked exactly the same. The pink awning flapped slightly in the breeze. The chalkboard sign sat crooked with half-erased specials. The window bore streaks from last night's rain. But the heart of the place still beat strong. She pushed open the door, and the scent hit her like a memory butter, vanilla, and the quiet hush of home. Jenna was inside, bent over the counter, counting scones. When she looked up and saw Lila standing there, everything stilled. They stared at each other for a long second. Jenna dropped the scone tongs. "Lila," she whispered. Lila nodded, but her voice wouldn't come. Jenna rounded the counter so fast, she nearly knocked over a tray of croissants and threw her arms around her cousin. The hug was immediate, desperate, whole. "I thought you were God. I didn't know what to think," Jenna choked out. "Where have you been? We thought something terrible." Lila shook her head. "I'll tell you everything. Just ... not all at once." Jenna pulled back, her eyes dropping to the small curve of Lila's belly. Her expression flickered, but not with judgment, just surprise. Then, slowly, understanding. "Is it his?" she asked, voice barely audible. Lila nodded once. Jenna didn't speak again for a moment, but when she finally did, it was with unwavering softness. "Are you okay?" "No," Lila said, "but I will be." They spent the next few hours cleaning, not just the bakery, but something deeper, scrubbing away the dust of the past weeks, rearranging furniture, taking down outdated specials as if clearing space for something new. Lila moved slowly, aware of her body in a new way now. She wasn't the same woman who had fled Savannah in a whirlwind of fire and fury. She was tired, changed, and perhaps more honest. That afternoon, she sat in the back room with her feet up, sipping lemon water as Jenna prepared their reopening notice. Lila stared at the list of ingredients she used to know by heart. Bean, sea salt, dark chocolate, and tried to remember who she'd been before everything turned. She couldn't go back, but maybe, just maybe, she could start over. The bell above the door jingled later than expected, and for a moment Lila thought it might be a customer drawn in by the smell. But it was Colton. He stepped inside, dressed down in a slate-gray sweater and worn jeans. The absence of a tailored suit somehow made him feel more real, less like the man who had once taken her agency and more like the one trying now to find his own soul again. Jenna saw him and stiffened, instinctively moving in front of Lila. "It's okay," Lila said, touching her cousin's arm gently. "I asked him to come." Jenna gave her a skeptical look but stepped aside. Colton looked unsure of himself in the small bakery space, as though it weren't built for men like him. And maybe it wasn't, but he came anyway. "I didn't think you'd actually reopen," he said quietly. "I didn't think I'd have the strength to," Lila replied. But something shifted. "I think the baby deserves to know where its mother came from, what she built." He nodded, glancing around the space. "It smells the same, like almond and sugar." "That's the shortbread," she said. "My mum's recipe." Silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't cold. It was tentative, curious. "I brought something," he said, pulling a small, square box from his coat pocket. He set it on the counter and stepped back. Lila opened it carefully. Inside was a silver key, engraved with the outline of a house. "What is this?" she asked, confused. "It's the deed to the lakeside property," he said. "In your name. No conditions, no signatures, no leverage." She blinked, stunned. "Why would you do that?" "Because I took everything from you," he said simply, "and I'll never be able to undo that. But I can give back what I can." Lila looked at him, really looked at him. There was no manipulation in his voice, no calculation in his posture, just a quiet, aching kind of hope. "This doesn't make us even," she said. "I know, and it doesn't mean I trust you. I wouldn't expect you to. But it does mean I'm starting to believe you might be capable of more than cruelty," she said. He swallowed hard. "That's all I can hope for." When he left, Jenna turned to Lila with wide eyes. "Did you just witness that?" Colton Hayes showing remorse. Lila let out a soft, exhausted laugh. "I think we both survived something neither of us can name, and now we're figuring out what comes after." That evening, as twilight settled over Savannah and the ovens cooled, Lila sat in the front window of the bakery with a notebook in her lap and a pen in her hand. She wrote a letter, not to Colton, not to the baby, but to herself, a promise that she would never again shrink to fit someone else's idea of who she should be, that she would protect what mattered, that she would choose love only when it came with freedom, and that, even if she stumbled, she would rise again stronger, steadier, and still sweet at her core. Tomorrow, the bakery would open again, and Savannah would smell like cinnamon and second chances, and Lila Dawson, baker and survivor, would stand in the heart of it all, not as someone broken, but as someone finally beginning to be whole. The summer air had shifted. It was the kind of heat that clung to the skin and weighted every breath, making even the smallest movement feel like effort. Savannah had settled into the stillness that came before the storm, humid, breathless, full of waiting, and so had Lila Dawson. She stood in the kitchen of the sugar jar, brushing flour from her fingers, when the first pain struck. It wasn't sudden, nor cinematic, but deep, like something primal had stirred and begun to tug at the root of her spine. She paused, both hands gripping the edge of the counter, as the dough beneath her went forgotten. Lila, Jenna's voice, called from the front, followed by the sound of the doorbell jingling. "We've got an early order for her." Cousin stopped short when she entered the kitchen. Her eyes widened. "Are you okay?" Lila tried to nod, but a second wave of pain rolled through her, stronger this time. She clutched her belly, bending slightly. "I think it's happening." Jenna didn't panic. She had always been the more grounded one. "You're due next week." "I know," Lila breathed through clenched teeth, "but I don't think he cares about schedules." Within minutes, Jenna had the car ready, and Colton was on the phone. Somehow, he had become a quiet fixture in Lila's life in recent weeks, never overstepping, never assuming, just present, steady, waiting, it seemed, for a chance to be more than the man who had once held her prisoner. When she was wheeled into the birthing suite at Memorial Health, her contractions were 5 minutes apart, and climbing fast. The nurses moved like clockwork. She was dilated, sweating, trembling. Pain, raw and rhythmic, tore through her like waves on a jagged shore. Colton had arrived barely 10 minutes after her. She hadn't asked for him, but when she opened her eyes between contractions and saw him standing at the edge of the room, pale and completely still, something inside her settled. Not because she needed him, but because he was there. She turned her face toward him and whispered, "Stay." He stepped closer, not to command, not to control, just to listen. As the hours passed, the pain grew sharper, the exhaustion deeper. Lila screamed once uncharacteristically and gripped Colton's hand as if her bones might break. And he, the man who had once believed power was his only language, said nothing except, "You're doing great. You're not alone. I'm here." By midnight, she was nearly unconscious between contractions. The doctors told her the baby was turned slightly, that it might take longer, that she might need intervention. She barely heard them. Everything had narrowed to the sound of her own breath, and the warmth of Colton's palm pressed against hers. In those final moments, time unraveled. The sterile white walls, the beeping machines, the firm voices faded. All that remained was the force of a body bringing forth life, and the man beside her who had never looked so wrecked. Then, with one final push that felt like fire and freedom all at once, Everett was born. A cry pierced the room. Lila collapsed back, drenched in sweat, tears running silently down her temples. The nurses moved efficiently, wrapping the baby in a blue and white blanket, checking his vitals. Someone said, "Healthy, strong heartbeat." Someone else said, "Perfect weight." But all Lila could see was Colton, standing at the foot of her bed, completely undone. His face had gone soft in a way she had never seen before, not even in his quiet moments. His eyes, usually so controlled, were wet. He looked at Everett like he didn't understand how the world was still spinning. Then he turned to her. "You did this." "No," Lila said, voice hoarse. "We did." Later, when the room dimmed and the nurses stepped out, Colton sat in the chair beside her bed, holding his son. "I don't know how to be a father," he confessed. "I never had one worth learning from." Lila watched him, every wall inside her tired, crumbling. "Neither did I," she murmured. "Maybe that's how we start, knowing what not to be." He nodded slowly. "When I saw you on that bakery floor, holding your stomach, I realized I had failed before I ever began. But tonight I saw what it meant to show up. You were here," she whispered. "That's something." He looked at her. "I want more than something." She didn't respond. She couldn't, not yet. The wounds between them were not healed with a single night, but the edges were softening. 2 days later, they left the hospital with Everett bundled in a carrier and the sun high over the moss trees of Savannah. The world had changed. Or maybe Lila had. They didn't return to the lake house. Not yet. Instead, Colton drove her back to Jenna's. The sugar jar would wait. Everything could wait. All that mattered now was the child asleep between them and the invisible thread that had begun to tie them together gently. And without permission, in the quiet of the nursery Jenna had hastily assembled, Leela rocked Everett in her arms while Colton stood in the doorway. He hadn't said much since the discharge, but now his voice cut softly through the room. "I bought the building next door to the sugar jar." She looked up, confused. "Why?" He shrugged. "I thought maybe you'd want to expand someday. Open a tea room, or a cafe." Leela stared at him. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I am trying to learn what it means to support something without trying to own it." The words caught in her throat. Everett stirred in her arms. She looked down at his face, tiny wrinkled, entirely unaware of the weight his birth had lifted. Then she looked back at Colton. "Give me time," she said. He nodded. "I'm not walking away," he added. "I know," she whispered. That's the difference. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Leela stayed up nursing Everett beneath the dim glow of the window lamp. The house was silent, but inside her, something had begun to sing. Not a song of resolution, not yet, but of the life that had cracked open inside her, and of the man outside. The nursery door, who was no longer a storm she feared, but the stillness that sometimes follows one. The farmhouse stood in a patch of quiet a few miles outside Savannah, where the land flattened into golden fields, and the sky opened wide above the world. Lila had chosen it months before, giving birth quietly, without fanfare, without asking Colton's permission or opinion. It had felt like the first real decision she'd made for herself since the chaos began. To her surprise, Colton hadn't protested. In fact, when she showed him the listing, he had only said, "Does it feel like home?" And that was all it took. He had the papers signed the next day. It was their home now, in some undefined sense of the word. The walls still smelled faintly of fresh paint and sawdust. The floors creaked in that old southern way, as though the house itself was sighing with time. There were wildflowers in jars on every windowsill, and Everett's crib stood near the front room's large bay window, where soft light filtered in each morning. The days became rhythm, not unlike baking, measured, exacting, sometimes chaotic, but beautiful in its own way. Colton would rise first, quietly so as not to wake Lila. She needed sleep-deep, healing sleep. He made coffee now, always too strong, but she drank it anyway. He changed diapers without being asked. He rocked Everett with a surprising tenderness, even as he still struggled with the mechanics of a baby's needs. Leela watched him from a distance, learning him anew. He had stopped trying to fix everything. Instead, he asked questions. He showed up. He got things wrong, and he stayed. One afternoon, Lila stood barefoot in the grass, Everett cradled against her chest in a sling. The summer wind lifted her hair as she watched Colton struggle to fix the loose gate at the edge of their property. He cursed under his breath, his shirt damp with sweat, and for the first time in a long time, she laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a shield, but a laugh from somewhere real. Colton looked up, startled. "You laughing at me or with me?" "Mostly at you," she said. He wiped his brow and leaned on the fence post. "You could come help. I carried a human for 9 months and delivered him without drugs." She shot back with a smirk. "You can handle a few bolts." He chuckled, and it felt like the earth shifted slightly, but unmistakably. Later that evening, they sat together on the front porch. The sky had gone lavender. Fireflies sparked in the tall grass. Everett slept between them in a bassinnet. Colton turned to her, his voice quieter than usual. "Do you ever think about before?" She didn't have to ask what he meant. Their beginning had been violent, strange, twisted by revenge and power. And yet, here they were still breathing, still becoming. "I try not to," she said honestly, "but sometimes it sneaks up on me." He nodded. "Me too." "I don't forgive it," she added. "I wouldn't ask you to." Silence settled over them again, but it wasn't a wall. It was something else, a space where truth could breathe. "I think what matters," she said after a moment, "is what we do next. I want to do it right this time," he said. "I don't want to love you out of guilt or fear. I want to learn how to love you the way you deserve." She looked at him rarely. The man who had once taken everything now sat beside her, asking for nothing but the chance to earn it back. "You're still learning," she said. "So are you," he replied. They didn't kiss. They didn't promise each other forever. They just sat together, watching the sky change colors like a slow-blooming truth. Weeks passed. They grew into a kind of dance parenthood, rebuilding, healing. Colton began working remotely, slowly stepping back from his company's day-to-day. He didn't say why, but Lila knew he was choosing presence over power, and she started baking again, not for the business, not yet, just for the joy of it. The smell of cinnamon and browned butter filled the house again, grounding her in something solid. Then one morning, she woke to find Colton already in the nursery, whispering to Everett. She stayed by the door, listening. "I was scared of you, kid," he murmured. "Scared I'd ruin you before you ever had a chance. But your mum, she makes me want to try. She makes me better just by being who she is." Lila's heart ached, in a way she hadn't expected. Not with pain, but with something sweeter, something hopeful. That afternoon, they took Everett to the city for the first time since his birth. The streets of Savannah bustled, but Lila didn't feel overwhelmed. Not this time. They stopped by the sugar jar. Jenna was inside, apron dusted, with flour, shouting orders to 2 new hires. When Jenna saw them through the glass, her entire face softened. "He's beautiful," she whispered as she cradled Everett. "You did good, Lila." "I didn't do it alone," Lila replied, glancing at Colton, who stood awkwardly beside the counter. Jenna raised an eyebrow but said nothing. They stayed for lunch, seated at the corner table where Lila once dreamed of growing old, surrounded by sugar and stories. And for the first time in years, that dream no longer felt far away. That night, as they drove back to the farmhouse, Everett asleep in his car seat, Colton reached for Lila's hand across the console. She hesitated, but only for a second. Then, her fingers curled into his, warm and sure. And in that quiet moment, somewhere between the city and the wild stretch of country road, they both understood something simple and sacred. Love doesn't always begin where it should, but it can still find its way home. The summer had faded into gold. The fields around the farmhouse rippled with tall grass, kissed by the last warm winds of the season. Lila stood by the kitchen window with June cradled in her arms, the infant's tiny breath rising and falling like a prayer. Her daughter's skin was soft and new, her presence a quiet miracle after the storm of years that preceded her. Outside, Everett chased butterflies through the wildflowers, his laughter sharp and bright, and just beyond him, Colton knelt by the fence line, coaxing new growth from the garden beds he had planted with his own hands. No assistants, no gardeners, just him, dirt beneath his fingernails and sweat on his brow. He had not gone back to the city in nearly 8 months. He had left it behind. The news had made the rounds in the real estate world like a flash. Colton Hayes had sold off his shares, stepped down from his empire, walked away from the towers he once ruled. Some called it a crisis, others speculated scandal. But he didn't flinch. He didn't offer statements or interviews. He simply turned inward to his home, his family, and the quiet rhythms of a life no headline could understand. At first, Lila hadn't known what to make of it. She had braced herself for change, for the inevitable pull of power to reclaim him, but it never came. And instead, she had learned something new about Colton. When he loved, he did so with ferocity. He just needed to learn how to show it without control. "I didn't leave the company to prove anything," he had told her one night as they watched the stars from the porch. "I left because I realized I didn't want to build skyscrapers anymore. I wanted to build a life." And so, he had begun again from the ground up. They turned one of the barn stalls into a flower room for Lila, with his help. She restored antique ovens and stained butcher block counters. She hung copper pots like jewelry and brought the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar back into the bones of the house. The sugar jar reopened quietly this time, not in the city, but out on the land. People came. Word traveled. Locals, tourists, even old friends drove miles to taste what she baked and to sit under the magnolia trees with tea in hand. She didn't build an empire. She built a sanctuary. Colton worked the register. He didn't complain. He kissed June's forehead each morning and carried Everett on his shoulders in the afternoons. He helped Lila fold laundry and read aloud from books he'd once considered. Beneath him, love had made him soft, not weak, but tender. And in that tenderness, he had finally become whole. One evening, as dusk melted across the sky, Lila walked barefoot into the field where Colton was stacking firewood for winter. June was strapped to her chest, already asleep. Her breath a gentle rhythm against her mother's ribs. Colton turned when he heard her. A streak of soot across his cheek, his shirt damp from work. "Firewood's almost done," he said. "You should come sit. I made sweet tea." She smiled, but didn't move closer yet. Instead, she studied him, rarely looked. The man before her bore almost no resemblance to the one who had once kidnapped her out of vengeance and pride. That man had been angry, sharp-edged, drowning in power. This man, he was quiet, weathered, by choice, no longer hiding behind control. "I've been thinking," she said softly. Colton set the axe down. "Dangerous words. I used to dream of escape," she said. "Of running. Of a life where no one made decisions for me, I remember. But now," she continued, "I don't want to run. I want to plant something and stay long enough to see it bloom." He stepped toward her slowly. "With me, with you." He swallowed, his voice catching. "Lila, I didn't know if you'd ever truly say that." She smiled. "Took me a while." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. It was old, frayed at the edges. "What's this?" "The deed," she said. "To the land. I had the lawyer change it. It's in both our names now." Colton opened it with trembling hands. "You didn't have to do this." "No," she replied, "but I wanted to. This is our home. You didn't earn it with money or apology. You earned it by showing up, every day." He looked down at the paper, then back at her. "Then I want to do something too." "What I want to?" "Marry you again." Lila blinked. "Again, not in revenge, not in shame, not in secrecy." He stepped closer. "I want our children to see what real love looks like. I want to say vows that mean something." She looked at him for a long moment. The last of the sun lit the lines of his face, lines that had softened, deepened, learned. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." They planned it simply. No grand cathedral, no velvet aisle, just family, friends, a linen dress, a boutonniere tucked into Colton's shirt, a canopy of trees, and the sound of Everett giggling with the flower petals he threw to early. Jenna officiated, her voice steady, proud, and when Colton took Lila's hands in his key, didn't speak as a man of power or legacy, but as one who had been remade. "I promise," he said, "to never lead you in fear, nor follow you in silence. I will walk beside you in storms and sunlight. I will not seek to possess, only to protect. I will love you in the messy, ordinary days that come after the vows, because it's there I've found the most sacred parts of us." He wiped his brow and leaned on the fence post. "You could come help. I carried a human for 9 months and delivered him without drugs." She shot back with a smirk. "You can handle a few bolts." He chuckled, and it felt like the earth shifted slightly, but unmistakably. Later that evening, they sat together on the front porch. The sky had gone lavender. Fireflies sparked in the tall grass. Everett slept between them in a bassinnet. Colton turned to her, his voice quieter than usual. "Do you ever think about before?" She didn't have to ask what he meant. Their beginning had been violent, strange, twisted by revenge and power. And yet, here they were, still breathing, still becoming. "I try not to," she said honestly, "but sometimes it sneaks up on me." He nodded. "Me too." "I don't forgive it," she added. "I wouldn't ask you to." Silence settled over them again, but it wasn't a wall. It was something else, a space where truth could breathe. "I think what matters," she said after a moment, "is what we do next. I want to do it right this time," he said. "I don't want to love you out of guilt or fear. I want to learn how to love you the way you deserve." She looked at him rarely. The man who had once taken everything now sat beside her, asking for nothing but the chance to earn it back. "You're still learning," she said. "So are you," he replied. They didn't kiss. They didn't promise each other forever. They just sat together, watching the sky change colors like a slow-blooming truth. Weeks passed. They grew into a kind of dance parenthood, rebuilding, healing. Colton began working remotely, slowly stepping back from his company's day-to-day. He didn't say why, but Lila knew he was choosing presence over power, and she started baking again, not for the business, not yet, just for the joy of it. The smell of cinnamon and browned butter filled the house again, grounding her in something solid. Then one morning, she woke to find Colton already in the nursery, whispering to Everett. She stayed by the door, listening. "I was scared of you, kid," he murmured. scared I'd ruin you before you ever had a chance. But your mum, she makes me want to try. She makes me better just by being who she is." Leela's heart ached, in a way she hadn't expected, not with pain, but with something sweeter, something hopeful. That afternoon, they took Everett to the city for the first time since his birth. The streets of Savannah bustled, but Lila didn't feel overwhelmed. Not this time. They stopped by the sugar jar. Jenna was inside, apron dusted, with flour, shouting orders to 2 new hires. When Jenna saw them through the glass, her entire face softened. "He's beautiful," she whispered as she cradled Everett. "You did good, Leela." "I didn't do it alone," Leela replied, glancing at Colton, who stood awkwardly beside the counter. Jenna raised an eyebrow but said nothing. They stayed for lunch, seated at the corner table where Leela once dreamed of growing old, surrounded by sugar and stories. And for the first time in years, that dream no longer felt far away. That night, as they drove back to the farmhouse, Everett asleep in his car seat, Colton reached for Lila's hand across the console. She hesitated, but only for a second. Then, her fingers curled into his, warm and sure. And in that quiet moment, somewhere between the city and the wild stretch of country road, they both understood something simple and sacred. Love doesn't always begin where it should, but it can still find its way home. The summer had faded into gold. The fields around the farmhouse rippled with tall grass, kissed by the last warm winds of the season. Lila stood by the kitchen window with June cradled in her arms, the infant's tiny breath rising and falling like a prayer. Her daughter's skin was soft and new, her presence a quiet miracle after the storm of years that preceded her. Outside, Everett chased butterflies through the wildflowers, his laughter sharp and bright, and just beyond him, Colton knelt by the fence line, coaxing new growth from the garden beds he had planted with his own hands. No assistants, no gardeners, just him, dirt beneath his fingernails and sweat on his brow. He had not gone back to the city in nearly 8 months. He had left it behind. The news had made the rounds in the real estate world like a flash. Colton Hayes had sold off his shares, stepped down from his empire, walked away from the towers he once ruled. Some called it a crisis, others speculated scandal. But he didn't flinch. He didn't offer statements or interviews. He simply turned inward to his home, his family, and the quiet rhythms of a life no headline could understand. At first, Lila hadn't known what to make of it. She had braced herself for change, for the inevitable pull of power to reclaim him, but it never came. And instead, she had learned something new about Colton. When he loved, he did so with ferocity. He just needed to learn how to show it without control. "I didn't leave the company to prove anything," he had told her one night as they watched the stars from the porch. "I left because I realized I didn't want to build skyscrapers anymore. I wanted to build a life." And so, he had begun again from the ground up. They turned one of the barn stalls into a flower room for Leela, with his help. She restored antique ovens and stained butcher block counters. She hung copper pots like jewelry and brought the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar back into the bones of the house. The sugar jar reopened quietly this time, not in the city, but out on the land. People came. Word traveled. Locals, tourists, even old friends drove miles to taste what she baked and to sit under the magnolia trees with tea in hand. She didn't build an empire. She built a sanctuary. Colton worked the register. He didn't complain. He kissed June's forehead each morning and carried Everett on his shoulders in the afternoons. He helped Leela fold laundry and read aloud from books he'd once considered. Beneath him, love had made him soft, not weak, but tender. And in that tenderness, he had finally become whole. One evening, as dusk melted across the sky, Lila walked barefoot into the field where Colton was stacking firewood for winter. June was strapped to her chest, already asleep. Her breath, a gentle rhythm against her mother's ribs. Colton turned when he heard her, a streak of soot across his cheek, his shirt damp from work. "Firewood's almost done," he said. "You should come sit. I made sweet tea." She smiled, but didn't move closer yet. Instead, she studied him, rarely looked. The man before her bore almost no resemblance to the one who had once kidnapped her, out of vengeance and pride. That man had been angry, sharp-edged, drowning in power. This man, he was quiet, weathered, by choice, no longer hiding behind control. "I've been thinking," she said softly. Colton set the axe down. "Dangerous words. I used to dream of escape," she said. "Of running. Of a life where no one made decisions for me. I remember. But now, she continued, I don't want to run. I want to plant something and stay long enough to see it bloom. He stepped toward her slowly. With me, with you. He swallowed, his voice catching. Lila, I didn't know if you'd ever truly say that. She smiled. Took me a while. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. It was old, frayed at the edges. What's this? The deed, she said. To the land. I had the lawyer change it. It's in both our names now. Colton opened it with trembling hands. You didn't have to do this. No, she replied, but I wanted to. This is our home. You didn't earn it with money or apology. You earned it by showing up every day. He looked down at the paper, then back at her. Then I want to do something too. What I want to marry you again. Lila blinked. Again, not in revenge, not in shame, not in secrecy. He stepped closer. I want our children to see what real love looks like. I want to say vows that mean something. She looked at him for a long moment. The last of the sun lit the lines of his face, lines that had softened, deepened, learned. Yes, she whispered. Yes, they planned it simply. No grand cathedral, no velvet aisle, just family, friends, a linen dress, a boutonniere tucked into Colton's shirt, a canopy of trees, and the sound of Everett giggling with the flower petals he threw to early. Jenna officiated, her voice steady, proud, and when Colton took Lila's hands in his key, didn't speak as a man of power or legacy, but as one who had been remade. I promise, he said, to never lead you in fear, nor follow you in silence. I will walk beside you in storms and sunlight. I will not seek to possess, only to protect. I will love you in the messy, ordinary days that come after the vows, because it's there I've found the most sacred parts of us.